Hello, welcome to the Mercy and Pilgrim. Today, I'm taking a trip to White Ladies Priory in Shropshire. It's reputedly haunted. Let's take a look around. I'm on the path down to White Ladies Priory. Now, White Ladies is, as I say, reputedly haunted, and I hadn't really planned to do much with the ghost stuff just yet. But on this lane, it is reputed that you can hear, at times, spectral horses. The sound of spectral horses up and down this lane. The lane itself isn't very long, and White Ladies isn't very far down here. So, well, let's see what's down here. One thing I will say, definitely bring a good pair of boots. At this time of year, this lane's as muddy as anything, so I'm trying very hard not to fall over while I'm filming. We're here now, just had a squirrel run across the path, and I'll give you a shot of the priory and talk a little about the history, and I'll talk a little about the ghosts. Behind me is White Ladies Priory. This is more properly known as the Priory of St Leonard. It was founded at some point in the 12th century, though there are no real documents for this. It's first mentioned in a grant of land to the canons of Hormond Abbey, just up the road, by Emma, the daughter of Reynold of Pulverbach. That was in around about 1186 at the latest. But there's no indication of who founded this and no documentation for it, but we know they were here by the late 12th century. The first recorded abbess is, I believe, around about 1225. The original building, this is the church which was originally cruciform in shape. The buildings that were for the nuns, the actual convent buildings, were this way. This is roughly to the north of the building, the church itself running roughly east-west. And the nuns would have lived here to the north in what was likely a timber-framed building. The actual abbess's quarters would have been likely to the west of that. Let's take a look around inside. Upon its founding, the abbey, the priory, was originally considered Augustinian. Their own documents note them as an Augustinian priory. They were widely misconstrued to be Cistercian nuns, which they weren't. The white habits must have confused people. And if you actually get as far as the 1920s, there's an Ordnance Survey map, which I'll put on the screen, that actually shows this as Cistercian, but their own documents do say they're Augustinian. Originally, there were 6 on site, 5 nuns and 1 abbess. Generally speaking, there wasn't a lot of scandal here, which is unusual, as usually there is either one scandal or another, or a murder. These Shropshire old houses do seem to have their share of one damn thing or another going on. But I guess they weren't all that well behaved, for all they were holy. This is the north entrance to the nave. The nave is the main bit of the church where the congregation goes, and I'm going to get a little closer and pan around because this is unusually fine stonework for an abbey or priory of this size. And we are at the west end of the nave. I'll come up to the transepts shortly. So entering here, it was, according to my information, a 5-bay nave with a 3-bay chancel. And as we walk to the east, you can certainly see 4, unless there was a window above there, surviving windows. Moving here along in an easterly direction, we now have the transepts, and you have, and I think my guess was correct from it before I started filming, the north transept right here. These didn't actually have any altars in them or any chapels in them. But as I say, the church was originally cruciform, which would make this area at the top here the chancel, and the altar would have been here. The abbey itself, financially, was never what you'd call a rich place. It had that in common with White Ladies Priory, which was just up the way. But they were supported by grants of land as people came in. They would bring land with them, and they had support from the local Ormond Abbey, which was very good of them. As I say, there wasn't a lot of scandal. What there was here was more due to, it clearly was that people couldn't do the books, which that happened a couple of times. You also have a moment in, I believe, 1338, where the Bishop of Lichfield had to get involved to reprimand the then abbess, I believe Alice of Pulverley. I'll correct that later on in the subtitles if I'm wrong. And she'd come from a rich family, and she'd bought a grant of land with her, and she was dressing in a very fine manner that wasn't really befitting of an abbess, and also was hunting and keeping dogs. And, well, the Bishop of Lichfield wasn't very impressed with that, so that got stopped. Upon its eventual dissolution, the abbey was valued at about £17. Doesn't seem a lot to us. It was back then. Now, eventually, a couple of years after that valuation, the nuns dispersed, and this place was passed on to the nobility, whereupon it eventually became a noble house. I'm going to pause there because I want to talk about something that a little later during its tenure as a priory. You see, this was originally cruciform, but largely it was unaltered until the medieval period, at which point a sacristy was added to the north of the nave, and a chapel was added to the south of the nave. Now, this is interesting. He says, catching his stick. And the reason is this. If I turn, this, to me, doesn't look like an interior wall. And as I come round here, that doesn't look particularly interior either. I was sat there last night thinking, if this is cruciform, what's with the south transept? What I think is this area behind me might be the additional chapel, because right down there, you've got the south door of the nave, and the chapel is said to have been built to the south door, to the south of the nave. So, personal theory here, I'm not an architect. And I had a look at the LiDAR for this place, and you can't really see very much of foundations or anything else on it. But I personally think that what's right behind me is a chapel that was added in the medieval. If I'm wrong, well, like I say, it's just a personal theory. And I've got a few of those about other places as well. But I will always say that it's a personal theory and not presented as fact. Once this was in the hands of the nobility, a large wooden house was built to the north. And this pretty much replaced the old nuns' quarters, those buildings, and really it really became a noble house at that point, or at least the house of someone wealthy. But in the 17th century, the house that was here played host to a fugitive king, only for the one night. King Charles II had just had a whooping at the Battle of Worcester. His forces were all over, and a lot of them were in Shropshire. In fact, if you go down to the church at Tongue, some of them hold up in there, and there's actually a cannonball hole in the wall of the church from that war. It's still there, no one fixed it. He was given a little food here and eventually left this place in disguise. So, the site continued as a private residence until the 1800s, whereupon it became a graveyard, a local Roman Catholic cemetery. This carried on until the early part of the 20th century. The site passed to the state. There are a lot of bodies here. You can see a couple of gravestones in the south transept. And we kind of have to talk about ghosts at this point. The site, as I've said, White Ladies Priory, is reputedly haunted. I mentioned earlier that out in the lane that goes past here, you've got spectral hoofbeats. Some kind of ghostly horses have been reported to be moving around. I'm going to use the word reported a lot here. If you get run over by a ghostly horse in the lane outside, not my fault, wasn't me. Just get that out there. There are other things. People have seen white mist here. It's a rural area. Hey, you get mists. But ghosts, white figures have been seen here, and chanting's been heard. We've also had people report hearing latches and things like that. Can any of this be verified? I don't know. I'm not a paranormal investigator, but my attitude to the paranormal is you eliminate all possibilities, and then whatever you have left is worth considering as strange and unusual. I've read a number of accounts, and this site is mentioned repeatedly as picturesque and tranquil. One gentleman says that he remained here and quite lost track of time until the evening the sunset reminded him he had a home to go to. And even though it is in ruins, I have to agree with him. This is absolutely a tranquil place, and I would love to see it in the light of the sunset. That wraps it up for this video. If you like what you see, please do give the video a like, and the subscribe button awaits your attention. I've got to make a move home, and I've got a bit of a drive ahead of me, so I'll get started. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.